I wasn't drunk enough for this, not even close. The champagne in my glass had gone flat 20 minutes ago, but I kept swirling it anyway, watching the tiny bubbles disappear one by one, kind of like my excuses for being here. The invitation had arrived 3 months ago, heavyweight cream cardstock with gold foil lettering announcing the union of Kaito Tanaka and Ayane Hoshino. I'd stared at it for days before checking the attending box and dropping it in the mail. What else could I do? We had mutual friends. We'd parted on what he called good terms, though I remembered it differently, and maybe some masochistic part of me needed to see it with my own eyes to believe it was real. 9 months wasn't enough time to prepare for this moment. Not after 3 years together. The ballroom of the Grand Sakura Hotel sparkled with hundreds of twinkling lights. White roses and cherry blossoms adorned every surface. I'd chosen a seat in the back row, partly hidden by a decorative column. Perfect for a quick escape when I inevitably couldn't handle watching them exchange vows. The string quartet transitioned into the wedding march. Everyone stood. I knocked back the rest of my champagne and rose to my feet, my eyes fixed on Kaito at the altar. He looked exactly as I'd imagined he would, confident, handsome in his black tuxedo, beaming with that smile that had once made my heart race. Now it just made my stomach twist. "He looks happy," someone whispered nearby. He did. That was the worst part. When Ayane appeared at the entrance, a collective sigh rippled through the crowd. She was stunning in a silk gown that seemed to float around her, her dark hair adorned with pearl pins that caught the light. I'd only met her once, briefly, at a gallery opening 3 months after Kaito and I broke up. She'd been polite, if reserved. I couldn't hate her, which somehow made this harder. I watched her float down the aisle toward Kaito, toward the future we'd once planned together. We'd talked about our wedding during late-night conversations. Nothing concrete, just someday plans. He'd wanted traditional. I'd wanted something smaller, more intimate, one of many differences that eventually pulled us apart. The minister began speaking about love and commitment. My throat tightened. This was my cue. I'd mentally mapped my exit route, slipped behind the column, through the side door, down the corridor to the restroom where I could collect myself before calling a rideshare. But as I shifted my weight to leave, someone slid into the empty seat beside me. I froze, then slowly turned. Ren Tanaka, Kaito's older brother, sat there in an impeccably tailored gray suit. His presence surprised me. Throughout my relationship with Kaito, Ren had been a peripheral figure, someone I'd exchange polite hellos with at family dinners before he disappeared into the background. I'd always assumed he tolerated me, at best. "You're allowed to leave," he whispered, his voice low enough that only I could hear him. "But you don't have to do it alone." I blinked at him, caught off guard by the unexpected kindness. Up close, I noticed the subtle differences between the brothers. Ren's features more angular, his eyes more contemplative. A few strands of silver threaded through his dark hair at the temples, though he couldn't be much older than 30. "I'm fine," I whispered back automatically. He said nothing, just raised an eyebrow slightly. The minister asked everyone to be seated. I sank back into my chair, my escape plan momentarily derailed. On the altar, Kaito took Ayane's hands in his. I looked down at my empty champagne glass, suddenly wishing I'd grabbed another on my way out. "Here." Ren offered me a crisp white handkerchief. I started to shake my head, then felt the wetness on my cheeks. Traitor tears had escaped without permission. I took the handkerchief, dabbing quickly at my eyes. "Thanks." We sat in silence as the ceremony progressed. I kept my eyes on the elaborate flower arrangement directly in front of me, counting petals instead of listening to promises being exchanged. Ren remained beside me, a quiet presence that was somehow both unexpected and steadying. When the crowd erupted in applause, I looked up to see Kaito kissing his bride. It felt like watching a movie of someone else's life, familiar faces in unfamiliar roles. The knot in my chest loosened slightly. It was done. As everyone stood again, Ren leaned closer. "Would you like to step outside for a minute?" I nodded, grateful for the suggestion. He led the way, not touching me but staying close enough that his presence cleared a path through the crowd. We slipped out a side door into the hotel garden. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn. A stone path wound through flower beds and ornamental trees. I took a deep breath, the scent of roses and fresh air replacing the cloying perfume of the ballroom. "Better?" Ren asked. "Much." I handed his handkerchief back. "Sorry about that." Nothing to apologize for. He pocketed it without comment. I remember when my ex got married, I spent the entire ceremony mentally redecorating the church. That surprised a laugh out of me. I was counting rose petals, more productive than what I did. He smiled slightly. The reception starts in an hour. There's a small cafe across the street if you'd rather not go back in right away. I studied him, trying to understand his motives. In the 3 years I'd dated his brother, Ren and I had never had a real conversation, yet here he was, offering me an escape route with unnerving accuracy. "Why are you being nice to me?" I asked. He considered the question seriously. "Because weddings are hard enough when they're not your ex's, and because sometimes it helps to have company when you're trying not to fall apart in public." There was something refreshingly direct about him. No platitudes about how I'd find someone else or how time heals all wounds. Coffee sounds good, I decided. We walked side by side through the garden. I'd expected awkward silence, but instead, we talked about the unusually warm September weather, about the hotel's architecture, about nothing important, and yet somehow everything necessary. He had a dry sense of humor I'd never noticed before, making observations about guests we'd both recognized that had me smiling despite myself. The cafe across the street was small and quiet. We claimed a table by the window, and I ordered coffee strong enough to burn away the taste of champagne and regret. "You don't have to go back to the reception," Ren said after our drinks arrived. "No one would blame you." "I should make an appearance, drop off my gift at least." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. "It's not like I hate him, you know. We just stopped working together." Ren nodded. Kaito mentioned something about career differences. I let out a short laugh. Is that what he called it? I got a job offer in another city. He didn't want me to take it. I did anyway. He said I was choosing my ambition over our relationship. "Were you?" "No, I was choosing myself." The words came out with more force than I'd intended. "Sorry, old argument. Don't apologize, it's a valid choice." We fell into conversation about work then. Safe territory. I told him about my position as a content strategist for a digital marketing firm. He talked about the architectural consulting business he'd started 3 years ago. The sun began to set outside the cafe window, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. "We should probably head back," I said eventually, though I felt no real urgency to return. Ren checked his watch. "They'll be cutting the cake soon." I winced. Another tradition I can skip. He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. I've never understood the appeal of watching two people smash baked goods into each other's faces. Exactly. And then everyone has to eat cake that hands have been all over. I shuddered dramatically. Unsanitary at best. We shared a look of mock horror that dissolved into laughter. It felt surprisingly normal sitting here with him, as though we'd been friends for years instead of near strangers connected by his brother. When we finally left the cafe, the sky had darkened to deep blue. Music and laughter spilled from the hotel ballroom. I hesitated at the entrance. "I think I'm going to call it a night," I said. Could you tell Kaito and Ayane I wasn't feeling well?" Ren nodded. "Of course. Thank you. For everything." I fiddled with the strap of my purse. "It was unexpectedly nice talking with you. The unexpected things often are." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "If you ever want to continue our discussion about unsanitary wedding traditions or anything else." I took the card, running my thumb over the embossed logo. "I might take you up on that." "I hope you do." I entered his number into my phone before tucking the card away. When I looked up, he was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Good night, Clara. Good night, Ren." I walked away first, calling a ride as I went. As I waited at the curb, I glanced back once. Ren still stood by the entrance, his tall figure silhouetted against the light from the hotel. He raised a hand in farewell before turning to go back inside. In the quiet of the car heading home, I realized I'd made it through the day I'd been dreading for months. Not unscathed, but not shattered either. And somehow I'd left with something I hadn't expected. A new number in my phone, and the lingering warmth of a conversation that felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. My phone lit up with a text notification. "Did you see the documentary on urban architecture I mentioned?" Ren had texted me just before midnight, continuing our conversation from earlier that day. 3 weeks had passed since Kaito's wedding, since the moment Ren had handed me his business card outside the Grand Sakura Hotel. What had started as a polite, "Hope you got home safely" text the day after the wedding had somehow evolved into daily conversations. "Just finished it. You were right about the section on adaptive reuse. Reminded me of that project you mentioned in the theater district." I pulled my comforter tighter around my shoulders. The apartment felt quiet at this hour, the only light coming from my phone screen and the dim glow of the city through my blinds. Another text popped up. "Good eye. Most people miss that connection. Still thinking about your question from earlier, about whether career passion inevitably comes at a personal cost." I smiled. This was what our conversations had become, weaving between casual observations and deeper questions that kept us texting until one of us finally surrendered to sleep. I'm still not sure there's a clean answer. My parents would say yes. Kaito definitely thought so. I hesitated before hitting send, wondering if mentioning his brother crossed an invisible line. But Ren and I had gradually stopped dancing around the subject of Kaito. He existed in the background of our conversations, unavoidable context rather than a focal point. Kaito sees trade-offs where there don't need to be any. Always has, even as kids. Success to him means winning at everything simultaneously. The response came quickly, as though he'd been waiting. I found myself analyzing his words, wondering what other insights into Kaito I might gain from Ren, the person who'd known him longest. "What about you?" I wrote. "Do you see the same trade-offs?" The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. "I think passion becomes problematic when it's inflexible. My work matters to me, but I'd rather build something meaningful that adapts than something perfect that breaks." I read his text twice, struck by how different his perspective was from his brother's. Kaito had always viewed ambition as a straight line. Any deviation represented weakness or lack of commitment. Our breakup had essentially begun the moment I'd suggested my career might take us somewhere he hadn't planned to go. "That's surprisingly wise for 12:36 a.m., I replied. "Wisdom or sleep deprivation? Hard to tell at this hour." I laughed softly. "I should let you sleep. Early meeting tomorrow. Text me after. Let me know how it goes." I plugged my phone in and settled into bed, aware of the strange comfort I'd found in these late-night exchanges with someone who'd once been merely my ex's older brother. By the 6th week after the wedding, our text conversations had expanded to include photos. A strange cloud formation that reminded him of one of my abstract descriptions. A corner cafe with a sign he thought would make me laugh. A sunset from his office window when he was working late. Small glimpses into each other's days that felt increasingly natural to share. "Would you want to grab coffee sometime?" Ren asked during one of our phone calls. Actual coffee, not just texting about it. The question shouldn't have made my stomach flip, but it did. We'd spent hours talking virtually, yet the prospect of sitting across from him at a cafe seemed suddenly significant. "Sure," I said, aiming for casual. "That would be nice." We agreed to meet at Riverside Cafe that Saturday, a place equidistant from both our apartments, with outdoor seating overlooking the water. I arrived early, securing a table with a view of the river. The morning air carried a hint of fall, though summer hadn't fully released its hold on the city. I spotted Ren approaching before he saw me, tall figure in a charcoal sweater, moving with that same measured confidence I'd noticed at the wedding. He carried 2 cups, which made me smile. He'd remembered my coffee order from our wedding conversation. "I hope this isn't presumptuous," he said, setting an extra shot latte in front of me. "You mentioned you like these when you have weekend work ahead." "Perfect memory," I said, genuinely impressed. "Thank you." He sat across from me, the morning light catching those silver strands at his temples. Not memory, attention. Something about the simple correction made me pause. How many times had Kaito gotten my preferences wrong despite years together? Yet here was Ren, noticing details from a single conversation. Our coffee stretched into lunch, then a walk along the riverfront. Conversation flowed with surprising ease, about books we'd both read, his architectural projects, my marketing campaign for an eco-friendly startup. "The client wants something viral, but also authentic," I explained, making air quotes, as if those two things naturally go together. "Clients and their contradictions," Ren nodded sympathetically. "Last month someone asked me to design something totally unique, but exactly like their competitor's building. What did you tell them?" "That I'd be happy to build them an original structure inspired by elements they admired." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "Then I designed something better." I laughed. Diplomatic but stubborn. I like that approach. Balance in all things. He stopped walking, turning to face the water. That's what I've learned from my work. Every structure needs both flexibility and strength. Is that an architectural principle or a life philosophy? Is there a difference? I studied his profile against the backdrop of the river. There was an understated thoughtfulness to him that I found increasingly compelling. That afternoon marked the beginning of our weekend ritual. Coffee at Riverside became a standing date, first weekly, then twice weekly as September rolled into October. I found myself looking forward to these meetings, planning my schedule around them, saving stories to share across the cafe table. "He's different from Kaito," Sarah said one evening as we sorted through clothes for a charity donation. My best friend had been tactfully curious about my growing friendship with Ren, never pushing but clearly interested. "They're brothers, but they might as well be from different planets," I agreed, folding a sweater I no longer wore. "Kaito fills every silence. Ren creates space for them." "And you're sure it's just friendship?" I looked up sharply. "Yes, of course." Sarah raised an eyebrow but said nothing more, returning to her sorting pile. Later that night, I caught myself scrolling through my text history with Ren instead of finishing a work proposal. The evolution was there in black and white, from polite exchanges to inside jokes, shared thoughts, and increasingly personal revelations. My phone buzzed with a new message from him. "Any interest in the documentary film festival this weekend? There's one about traditional Japanese carpentry techniques that looks fascinating." I hesitated only briefly before replying. "Absolutely. Send me the details." By our 2-month mark of regular meetings, something had shifted subtly between us. Our conversations deepened, touching on childhood dreams, professional disappointments, and family expectations. "I never understood why you and my brother didn't work out," Ren admitted one evening as we walked along the harbor after dinner at a new Thai place. The October air had turned crisp, and I'd wrapped my scarf tighter around my neck. "He talked about you like you were this temporary chapter in his life. But you always seemed so permanent." His honesty startled me. We'd mentioned Kaito in passing, but never discussed the specifics of our relationship. "We wanted different things," I said after a moment. "Or maybe the same things, but in different orders. I wanted to grow in my career, try living in different cities, explore possibilities. Kaito wanted—" I trailed off, searching for the right words. "Stability, predictability," Ren offered. "Yes, he had this very specific vision of what our life should look like. When I got offered that position in Chicago, he saw it as me choosing my ambition over him. I hadn't talked about this with anyone besides Sarah. He accused me of outgrowing him, but I was just growing into myself." Ren nodded slowly. "That sounds like Kaito. He's always equated change with loss." We stopped at the railing overlooking the water. Lights from the buildings across the harbor reflected on the dark surface, rippling with the gentle movement. "What about you?" I asked, turning to face him. "Do you see change that way?" He considered the question seriously, as he did with most things. "I think change is neutral. It's our response to it that determines whether it strengthens or weakens us." He paused. "Architecture taught me that. The buildings that last aren't always the most rigid. They're the ones designed to move with the earth." A comfortable silence fell between us. I studied his face in the ambient light from the harbor lamps, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the quiet intensity in his eyes. How had I never really noticed him during all those family gatherings with Kaito? "We should get dinner sometime," he said suddenly. "Not cafe food or takeout, but actual dinner." "Like tonight?" I teased, gesturing back toward the Thai restaurant we'd just left. "No." His eyes met mine directly. "Like at Miyako, they have a chef's tasting menu that's worth experiencing." Miyako was one of the most exclusive Japanese restaurants in the city. The invitation felt weighted with intention beyond simple friendship. "That sounds nice," I said carefully. "Friday at 8? I nodded, ignoring the flutter in my stomach. Friday at 8. Miyako was all understated elegance, minimalist decor with accents of dark wood and soft lighting. Ren wore a navy suit that fit him perfectly, and I'd chosen a simple black dress that I usually reserved for client presentations. The maitre d' led us to a secluded corner table. Ren pulled out my chair before settling across from me. "This place is beautiful," I said, taking in the delicate ikebana flower arrangement at the center of our table. "I thought you'd appreciate it." Ren looked pleased with my reaction. The chef trained in Kyoto for 15 years before opening here. Throughout dinner, I found myself watching him. The careful attention he paid to each dish, the questions he asked our server, the way he listened completely when I spoke. Course after course arrived, each more artfully presented than the last. We talked about everything and nothing, losing track of time until I glanced around and realized the restaurant had nearly emptied. "I think we might be keeping them from closing," I whispered, noticing servers discreetly tidying nearby sections. Ren checked his watch, looking surprised. "It's almost midnight." "How did that happen?" I laughed softly. "Good company makes time irrelevant," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. Outside, the night air had turned cool. Ren offered me his jacket before I could even shiver, draping it gently around my shoulders. "Thank you for tonight," I said as we waited for our ride shares. "For everything, really. These past months have been—" I searched for the right word. "Unexpected?" he suggested. "Yes, in the best way." His ride arrived first. Before stepping toward the car, he hesitated, then leaned down to kiss my cheek, a brief, warm contact that felt both friendly and something more. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Ren." I watched his car pull away, my fingers absently touching the spot where his lips had brushed my skin. Standing under the restaurant's awning, I realized something significant had changed without my noticing. My phone buzzed with a text notification. I expected it to be my ride, but instead saw Ren's name. "Home safely. Thank you for a perfect evening." I smiled and typed back a response, aware that at some point over these past months, these messages had become essential to my days. I no longer spent sleepless nights checking Kaito's Instagram or wondering about his new life with Ayane. Instead, my phone held months of conversations with Ren, genuine, unexpected, and increasingly necessary. What had begun as a refuge from awkwardness at a wedding had grown into something neither of us had anticipated, something that felt remarkably like coming home. I checked my phone again, calculating the minutes until 7 o'clock. 3 hours and 22 minutes. The quarterly marketing report sat half-finished on my laptop, but I kept losing focus. "Earth to Clara," Sarah said, waving a hand in front of my face. We were supposed to be discussing client strategies over lunch, but my mind kept drifting. "You checked your phone 4 times in the last 10 minutes. "Sorry." I put it face down on the table. "I'm listening." "No, you're not." She took a bite of her salad, studying me with amusement. "This is about Ren, isn't you?" I stabbed at my pasta. "We're meeting at 7. He's been in Boston for a client presentation since Monday." "That's 3 days, Clara, not 3 years." "I know that." "And you've been texting the whole time, right?" "That's not the point." I picked up my water glass to hide my embarrassment. The truth was, 3 days without seeing Ren had felt strangely hollow. After nearly 3 months of coffee dates and dinners, phone calls and texts, his absence left a space I couldn't quite fill. Since that night at Miyako, something had changed between us. The kiss on the cheek, the meaningful glances, the lingering goodbyes. We were dancing around something neither of us had named yet. My thoughts cycled back to him during quiet moments at work, when I made coffee in the morning, when I fell asleep at night. Sarah snapped her fingers. "You're doing it again. This is worse than I thought." "What? You get this look." She made an exaggerated, dreamy expression. "It's actually kind of cute, in a nauseating way." I threw my napkin at her. "I do not look like that." "You absolutely do," she grinned. "So when are you going to admit this is more than friendship?" I opened my mouth to protest, then closed it. What was the point of denying it to Sarah? She knew me too well. "I don't know what it is," I admitted. "It's complicated." "Because of Kaito?" "Partly." I pushed my plate away. "He's Kaito's brother. That whole situation is messy enough without adding this to it." "Clara," Sarah said, her voice gentler now, "Kaito is married to someone else. He moved on first." "I know, it's not just that." I struggled to articulate the tangle of feelings. "Ren is different. The way I feel with him is different. It scares me a little." "Different how?" I thought about it. With Kaito, everything felt predetermined, like we were following a script. With Ren, I never know what's coming next, but I always want to find out. Sarah smiled. "That sounds promising, not scary. Maybe they're the same thing." The rain started as a light drizzle while we walked through Luna Park. Ren had suggested it when he returned from Boston, a small amusement park at the edge of the city that had recently been renovated. December had brought colder temperatures, but the park remained open, strung with holiday lights that reflected in puddles forming on the pavement. I designed the restoration for the carousel building, Ren explained as we passed game booths and food stands. The original was built in 1927. Is that why you wanted to come here? I asked, noticing how the colored lights caught in his dark hair. Partly, he smiled. I also thought you might enjoy it. You mentioned never having a proper amusement park date. The fact that he remembered that casual comment from weeks ago made my chest tighten. Ren noticed things, small details, offhand remarks, and stored them away. Each time he revealed one, it felt like being handed a small gift. We tried our luck at the ring toss, both terrible, and the shooting gallery, he was surprisingly good. Ren won me a small plush penguin that I tucked into my coat pocket. The rain remained gentle, more mist than downpour, as we shared cotton candy and walked toward the center of the park. There it is, Ren said, gesturing ahead to an ornate wooden pavilion, the carousel. The structure was beautiful, a 12-sided wooden building with detailed carvings and large glass panels between carved posts. Inside, a restored carousel turned slowly, painted horses rising and falling to tinkling music. Without the summer crowds, we had the place almost to ourselves. It's beautiful, I said, admiring the craftsmanship. You restored this? My firm did. I led the project. He ran his hand along one of the wooden posts. We preserved as much of the original material as possible. These carvings are all original. We just cleaned and restored them. I watched him as he explained the process, the challenges of matching century-old woodwork, the satisfaction of seeing it completed. His passion showed in the way his eyes brightened, how his hands moved when he spoke. I found myself studying the shape of his mouth, the line of his jaw, until I realized he had stopped talking and was looking at me questioningly. Sorry, I said, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. I was listening, I promise. You were staring, he corrected, but his smile took any sting from the words. Maybe a little. A crash of thunder interrupted us, and suddenly the gentle drizzle transformed into a downpour. We ducked further under the carousel pavilion's roof as other park-goers ran for shelter. That came out of nowhere, I laughed, pushing wet hair from my face. My light jacket was already soaked through at the shoulders. December storms, Ren agreed, shrugging off his own wet coat. At least we found cover. We stood back against the railing, watching sheets of rain pound the pavement outside. The few other visitors had scattered to different shelters, leaving us alone with the slowly turning carousel and its tinkling music box melody. I wrung water from the ends of my hair, aware of Ren watching me. What? I asked. Nothing. He looked away, then back. You look like that day at the wedding. Soaking wet and half drowned, I joked. Beautiful, he corrected quietly, when I first saw you sitting alone in that back row. Something about his tone made me pause. You noticed me then? I noticed you long before then, Clara. Water dripped from my sleeve as I tried to process his words. But you always seemed so distant. When I was dating Kaito, you hardly spoke to me at family gatherings. Ren watched raindrops race down the glass panels of the pavilion. For a moment, I thought he might not answer. I used to think you didn't like me, I admitted into the silence, echoing my earlier thoughts. His expression turned serious, contemplative in the way that was uniquely his. It wasn't that, he said finally, choosing his words with care. I didn't trust myself around you. The implication hung between us, electric and unexpected. I suddenly understood his distance during my years with Kaito. Not disapproval, but something entirely different. Oh, I said softly, the single syllable inadequate for the revelation. You were with my brother, he continued, his voice low enough that I had to lean closer to hear him over the rain, and I respected that completely. So I kept my distance. For 3 years? For 3 years. I thought back to those family dinners, holiday gatherings, casual encounters where Ren had always been polite but reserved. How many times had I interpreted his brevity as disinterest or judgment? How many times had I missed what was really happening? I never knew, I whispered. You weren't meant to. His eyes met mine. It wasn't fair to anyone. The carousel continued its circular journey behind us, colored lights reflecting in puddles forming at the edge of the pavilion. I became hyper-aware of how close we stood, of the rhythm of the rain, of my heart beating in my chest. And now? I asked, the question barely audible. Now everything's different. We stayed in the pavilion until the downpour eased to a steady rain. Ren bought hot chocolate from a vendor who'd reopened their stand, and we sat on a bench watching the storm clouds while steam rose from our cups. We talked about Boston, about my work project, about a book we'd both started reading. Normal conversation that did nothing to address what had been revealed. Yet something had changed between us. Each accidental touch, each shared glance felt weighted with new meaning. When the park lights began shutting down section by section, we knew it was time to leave. The rain had eased to a light drizzle again as we walked toward the exit. "I'll walk you home," Ren said, hailing a taxi at the park entrance. I gave the driver my address on Maple Avenue, and we rode in comfortable silence, the windows fogging with our breath in the cold car. Ren's hand rested on the seat between us, and I fought the urge to place mine over it. The rain picked up again as we reached my building. Ren paid the driver despite my protests and opened his umbrella as we stepped onto the sidewalk. We walked the short distance to my door, huddled close, his arm brushing mine under the limited shelter. At my doorstep, I turned to face him. "Thanks for tonight, for the penguin and the hot chocolate, and—" I trailed off, suddenly uncertain. "For getting you caught in a rainstorm?" He finished with a small smile. "That too." The streetlight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the angles of his cheekbones, the slight curl of his hair from the rain. I found myself committing these details to memory. "I should go in," I said, not moving. "You should," Ren agreed, stepping closer. The umbrella tilted as he leaned down, and raindrops spilled onto my face. I didn't care. When his lips finally met mine, everything else fell away. The rain, the cold, the complications. His hand came up to cradle my face, thumb brushing my cheek with such tenderness that my knees weakened. I reached for his coat, pulling him closer as the umbrella tilted further, sending a cascade of water down our shoulders. We broke apart, laughing as the rain soaked us completely now. Ren dropped the useless umbrella to frame my face with both hands, kissing me again, more deeply. I tasted rain and chocolate and possibility on his lips. When we finally pulled apart, both breathless and dripping, I fumbled for my keys with unsteady hands. "Do you want to come up?" The question slipped out before I could consider its implications. Ren tucked a wet strand of hair behind my ear. "Yes," he said honestly, "but not tonight." I understood what he wasn't saying. This wasn't casual for either of us. Whatever was happening between us deserved care, patience. "Another time," I agreed. "Another time," he echoed, pressing one more kiss to my forehead. "Good night, Clara. Good night, Ren." I watched him retrieve the forgotten umbrella and walk back toward the street, turning once to look back at me with an expression that made my heart squeeze in my chest. Only when his tall figure disappeared around the corner did I finally unlock my door. Inside my apartment, I leaned against the closed door, heart racing with complicated emotions, desire, guilt, and the terrifying certainty that this feeling was real. Water pooled at my feet as I stood there, replaying every moment, every word, every touch. I pulled the small plush penguin from my pocket, setting it on my entry table. The simple souvenir seemed to embody everything about this evening, unexpected, sweet, and somehow significant. I touched my fingers to my lips, still feeling the press of his. What were we doing? What did this mean for his relationship with Kaito? For me? The questions bubbled up, demanding answers I didn't have. Yet beneath the questions lay a certainty that both thrilled and frightened me. What I felt for Ren was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Deeper, more complex, more real. I peeled off my wet coat and headed for a hot shower, aware that everything had changed tonight. There was no going back to simple friendship, no pretending this was casual. We'd crossed a line, and whatever waited on the other side would require courage from both of us. As steam filled the bathroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, hair wild from the rain and Ren's fingers. I hardly recognized myself. Or maybe, I thought suddenly, this was the first time in a long while I was seeing myself clearly. The cherry blossoms had long since fallen, scattered by spring rains and swept away by city maintenance crews. Winter had melted into spring, which had ripened into early summer with astonishing speed. 6 months since Kaito's wedding day. 5 months since Ren and I had first kissed in the rain. We'd moved carefully at first, both aware of the complex web we were weaving. Weekend coffee dates had evolved into dinners, theater performances, lazy Sunday afternoons in his apartment or mine. each step deliberate, each moment precious in its newness. We hadn't told Kaito. The right time never seemed to materialize, the right words impossible to find. He's building a life with Ayane, Ren had reasoned. This would only complicate things unnecessarily. I'd agreed, though the secrecy sometimes left a bitter taste. But we'd been careful, avoiding certain restaurants, checking guest lists for mutual friends, keeping our public displays of affection minimal and private. Until last Tuesday, when Mika spotted us at the art gallery opening downtown. Mika, who had been Kaito's college roommate's girlfriend. Mika, whose expression of surprise had quickly transformed into understanding, then calculation. 3 days later, Ren received the text from his brother. Daikichi, Thursday, 7 p.m. We need to talk. Now we sat across from Kaito at a secluded corner table, the restaurant's subdued lighting doing little to soften the hard angles of his expression. The elegant space with its paper lanterns and bamboo partitions felt cavernous despite its intimate design. Kaito had arrived first, claiming the power position facing the door. He'd watched us enter together, noted our matched strides, the easy synchronicity that develops between two people who have grown accustomed to each other's presence. The silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the soft clink of ceramic as the server poured tea with practiced precision. I concentrated on the steam rising from my cup, avoiding the intensity of Kaito's stare. You were mine, Kaito said finally, his voice breaking the tense silence. Now you're his? I placed my chopsticks down carefully, the slight click against the lacquered rest unnaturally loud. I was never yours to keep, I replied, meeting his eyes directly. Neither of us belonged to each other. The words hung in the air between us. Kaito's face flushed, a familiar sign of his building anger that I recognized from our final arguments. That's not how it works, he said. You don't just move from one brother to another. There are boundaries, Clara. Respect. Our relationship ended because you couldn't accept me changing, I explained, keeping my voice level. Not because I stopped caring. You wanted me to be a specific version of myself that fit your plans. When I couldn't be that person anymore, you let me go. Ren remained silent beside me, his posture straight but relaxed. I could feel the heat of his leg near mine under the table, a quiet reassurance of his presence without interference. He was respecting my need to speak my truth. Kaito's attention shifted to his brother. And you? What's your excuse? You've wanted what was mine since we were children. My toys, my friends. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. My girlfriend. I respected your relationship completely while you were together, Ren finally spoke, his tone measured. But you chose to end it, and you chose to marry someone else. He set down his cup with deliberate care. Clara isn't property to be claimed or transferred. How convenient that you waited until I was married to make your move, Kaito shot back. How long exactly? Were you watching her at my wedding, planning this? His eyes narrowed. Or did it start before that? It wasn't like that, I interjected, but Kaito was focused entirely on his brother now. You've always been like this, he continued, voice rising slightly. So proper, so correct on the surface, while underneath you're calculating your advantage. Did you comfort her after our breakup? Play the understanding brother while undermining me? Ren's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of his rising anger. I didn't speak to Clara for months after your breakup. I saw her again at your wedding, where she was alone and hurting while you celebrated with your new wife. So you swooped in to rescue her? How noble. Stop it, I said sharply. I'm sitting right here. I'm not something that was stolen from you, Kaito. Then what are you, Clara? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you traded up to the more successful brother. Was that always the plan? The accusation stung with its cruelty and inaccuracy. I felt Ren tense beside me. That's enough. Ren's voice had dropped dangerously low. You chose Ayane because she fit your vision for the future. Clara deserved the same freedom to choose her own path. With my brother? Kaito laughed bitterly. Out of everyone in this city, you had to choose my brother? Do you have any idea how this makes me look to our family, to our friends? This isn't about you, I said. It never was. Bullshit. This is absolutely about me, about loyalty and betrayal and… No, I stood abruptly, my napkin falling to the floor. I'm not a consolation prize or revenge, I stated firmly. I'm someone who found connection in an unexpected place, someone who deserves to be happy, just like you found happiness with Ayane. Kaito stared up at me, his expression a mix of anger and something I couldn't quite define. Hurt, perhaps, or simply wounded pride. "If you truly cared about either of us," I continued, "you'd want that for us too." Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked toward the exit, past curious diners who quickly averted their eyes, through the ornate wooden doors and into the cool evening air. The street was busy with Thursday night crowds, couples walking hand in hand, groups of friends laughing, everyone moving through lives uncomplicated by the mess we'd created. I stood still on the corner, unsure where to go. My apartment was 15 blocks north. Ren's was in the opposite direction. I wondered if our relationship could survive this fracture, if the weight of family obligation would eventually crush what we'd so carefully built. The restaurant door opened behind me. I didn't turn, expecting to hear Kaito's voice, prepared for another confrontation. Instead, I felt Ren's presence as he stepped beside me, taking my hand without hesitation. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "For what?" "For my brother, for this situation, for the fact that finding you meant hurting him." I looked up at Ren's face, at the genuine concern in his eyes, and understood we'd already made our choice, months ago, in the rain outside my apartment. Perhaps even before that, in a quiet cafe across from a wedding venue. "Are you okay?" I asked, squeezing his hand. A small smile touched his lips. "Shouldn't I be asking you that? He's your brother." "And you're—" He paused, searching for the right word. "I'm what?" I prompted when he didn't continue. Instead of answering, he leaned down and kissed me gently, right there on the busy street corner, unconcerned with who might see. When he pulled back, his expression was resolute. "Let's go home." I nodded, feeling some of the evening's tension begin to dissipate. "Your place or mine?" "Whichever one has ice cream," he said, the hint of humor returning to his voice. As we walked toward the subway entrance, I didn't look back at the restaurant. Whatever damage had been done tonight would take time to heal, if it could heal at all. But for now, I chose to focus on the solid warmth of Ren's hand in mine, on the certainty that had grown between us over these past months. Some choices came with consequences, but that didn't make them wrong. A full year had passed since I'd sat in the back row of Kaito's wedding. Now I stood in front of an antique mirror in the bridal suite of Hillcrest Manor, watching September sunlight play across the lace details of my white dress. Outside the window, gardeners made final adjustments to the flower arrangements lining the stone pathway where, in less than an hour, I would walk toward Ren. My hands trembled slightly as I fastened pearl earrings, my mother's, to my ears. Not from doubt, but from the weight of the journey that had brought us here. The path from that rainy night kiss to this moment hadn't been smooth or straight. "Need help with those?" Sarah asked, appearing behind me in the mirror. As my maid of honor, she'd spent the morning keeping me calm and on schedule. "I got it," I said, securing the second earring, "just thinking about everything." "Having second thoughts?" Sarah's tone was light, but her eyes watched me carefully. I shook my head. The opposite, actually. I'm wondering why the right things sometimes take the longest routes to find us. The months following our confrontation with Kaito at Daikichi restaurant had tested us. Family gatherings became diplomatic missions, with Ren and I navigating carefully around Kaito's wounded pride. Christmas dinner at the Tanaka family home had been particularly excruciating. Kaito's parents confused by the tension, everyone avoiding certain topics with practiced precision. But Ayane, surprisingly, had become our strongest advocate. I remembered the January afternoon she'd appeared at my office doorway, asking if I had time for coffee. "He's hurt," she'd told me over steaming mugs at the cafe across the street. "Not because he still loves you, but because his image of how things should be got shattered." Her directness had caught me off guard. Kaito needs time to create a new story where he isn't the victim. She'd organized dinners, casual outings where the four of us could interact without the pressure of the entire Tanaka family watching. Each time got a little easier, conversations a little less stilted. By spring, Kaito had stopped looking at us like we'd committed an unforgivable betrayal. The reconciliation wasn't perfect. There were still moments when old hurts surfaced. But when Ren proposed to me on a warm June evening at Starlight Point, overlooking the city lights, Kaito had been among the first to call with congratulations, genuine ones, at Ayane's insistence. "5 minutes until your dad arrives," Sarah said, interrupting my thoughts. She adjusted a loose strand of my hair. "Any last makeup needs before I get your veil?" I'm good, I smiled at her. Thank you for everything today. As Sarah went to retrieve my veil from the adjacent room, I closed my eyes and let myself recall that night at Starlight Point. We'd hiked up the winding path as sunset painted the sky in strokes of gold and deep blue. At the clearing, Wren had spread a blanket and uncorked wine, setting out a picnic as city lights blinked on below us. We talked about work, about the architectural project he'd just won, about nothing in particular. When he took my hand and grew quiet, I sensed the shift before he spoke. I have something to tell you, he'd said, his voice steady but with an underlying current of nervousness I rarely heard from him. Something I should have told you months ago. My heart had quickened, mind racing through possibilities. That day at Kaito's wedding, he continued, when I saw you sitting alone in that back row. He paused, his eyes meeting mine. I'd noticed you long before then, Clara. Years before. But that day, watching you trying so hard to be okay, I recognized something in you that mirrored what I'd felt for so long. A kind of quiet loneliness that exists even when you're surrounded by people. He'd pulled me closer on the blanket, one hand tracing my cheek with such tenderness it made my throat tight. I would have chosen you first, he'd said softly, if I'd been brave enough. If I hadn't hidden behind propriety and my brother's feelings. Then he'd reached into his pocket and produced a small wooden box, handcrafted, with intricate inlays, and opened it to reveal a platinum ring with a single, perfectly cut emerald. I don't want to waste any more time being afraid, he'd said. Will you marry me, Clara? I'd said yes before he finished asking, the city lights blurring through my tears. A knock at the door pulled me back to the present. Clara, my father's voice called. It's time, sweetheart. Sarah returned with my veil, securing it carefully to my upswept hair. You look beautiful, she whispered, squeezing my hands. I'll see you out there. When she left, my father entered, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance. Dad, don't you dare cry, I warned him, feeling my own eyes growing damp. If you start, I'll start, and then my makeup will be ruined. He cleared his throat, blinking rapidly. Not crying, just have something in my eye, both eyes actually. I laughed, the sound releasing some of my nervous energy. He offered his arm, and together we walked through the manor house toward the garden doors. Ready? He asked as we paused before the heavy wooden doors. I took a deep breath, more than I've ever been for anything. The doors swung open to reveal the private garden transformed. White wooden chairs lined a stone pathway strewn with rose petals. Flowing white fabric draped between flowering cherry trees, planted especially for the occasion. Ren's surprise gift, a nod to our beginning at Kaito's cherry blossom-themed wedding. My eyes moved past our small gathering of friends and family to where Ren waited beneath an arch of white roses and greenery. He stood tall and straight, more handsome than I'd ever seen him in his dark suit. Beside him, Kaito adjusted his position as best man, their profiles so similar yet distinct. As the string quartet began to play, every face turned toward me. I caught Ayane's encouraging smile from the front row, Sarah's thumbs up from her position at the altar. My mother dabbed at her eyes despite her earlier promises not to cry. We began walking, and I felt a surprising calm settle over me. The path from Kaito to Ren hadn't been what anyone would have predicted or planned. It had been messy and complicated, full of unexpected turns and difficult conversations. But with each step toward Ren, whose eyes never left mine, I knew with absolute certainty I was walking toward exactly where I belonged. Not as Kaito's ex or Ren's new love, but as Clara Williams, a woman who had learned to choose herself first, and in doing so, found someone who chose her completely. When I reached him, Ren took my hands in his. Up close, I could see the emotion in his eyes, the slight tremble in his fingers matching my own. You're here, he whispered, too low for anyone else to hear. I'm here, I confirmed. The officiant welcomed everyone and began speaking about love and commitment, about journeys and destinations, but I barely heard the words. I was lost in the warmth of Ren's hands holding mine, in the knowledge of everything we'd overcome to stand in this moment together. When it came time for our vows, Ren spoke first. Clara, he began, his voice steady and clear, I promise to listen, not just to your words but to the spaces between them, to notice the small things that make you who you are, to create room for you to grow and change, knowing that the woman you become tomorrow may be different from the woman beside me today, and loving each version equally. He squeezed my hands gently. I promise to build a life with you that bends without breaking, that adapts without losing its foundation. A life where we choose each other day after day, not out of obligation, but out of the simple joy of belonging together. Tears welled in my eyes as I began my own vows. "Ren," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, "I promise to be brave enough to change when necessary, and strong enough to remain true to myself. To remember that love isn't about fitting into someone else's plan, but creating something new together." I took a breath, feeling the truth of my next words deep in my chest. I promise to walk beside you, not behind or ahead, to remember that the most worthwhile journeys rarely follow straight lines, and to trust that whatever detours life takes us on, we'll navigate them together. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of rings exchanged and pronouncements made. When Ren finally kissed me as his wife, applause and cheers erupted around us. I caught sight of Kaito, clapping with genuine happiness, his arms soon finding Ayani's shoulders. As we turned to face our guests, hand in hand, sunlight broke through clouds that had gathered during the ceremony. It illuminated the garden, catching on the small dewdrops clinging to the cherry blossoms above us. Standing there, surrounded by the people who had witnessed our complicated journey, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. Sometimes the most direct path isn't the right one. Sometimes you need to lose your way completely, to wander through heartbreak and uncertainty, before finding where you truly belong. And sometimes, waiting at the end of that winding road is exactly the love you never knew to look for but always needed to find.